And again, what we're going to do is create a feature around articles. Now this will take components that already exist on a standard Drupal installation and wrap them up into a feature module. I'm going to go ahead and call this articles, and notice that it creates a machine name automatically. For the description, I'm going to put all components related to the management of articles. And I'm going to leave version and URL of update XML blank. Okay, and now here is where we decide what goes into our feature. I'm going to go ahead and click on the drop-down link. Now here, we have a list of different components on our site that are exportable. And so we're going to go through each one and select components that are associated with articles. So let's begin with dependencies. You can see that all of the modules on our site are listed here. Now, in order to understand this set of components, we need to know that the result of our feature, once we select all of our components, is going to be an exported module. And this module will be one that we'll enable on our site, just like any other module. So what features is basically a module builder that includes various exportable pieces inside of the code. And we'll look more at how that code is structured in a little bit. So how that comes into play when thinking about dependencies is that a feature module is just like any other module in that it can depend on other modules existing. And the reason we want to specify that there are some dependencies is so we don't get errors when we enable the module and all of a sudden it's referencing some code that isn't being included in our site. Now, most of the time, we won't actually need to manipulate this at all because as we add these other components, dependencies will be added automatically in order to support the component that we're exporting. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is fields. Now, if I'm looking for components that are related to a certain feature, a lot of times that keyword for the feature will appear in the name of the component. So for example, this comment node article comment body, article is mentioned in here. Under node article body, we have article here. So if we want to quickly identify what components might be associated with the feature that we're looking for, we can go ahead and do a browser search. So I'm opening up the search again, and I'm going to search for article. And I'm just going to make sure that match case is unselected here. And I'm using Command G in order to jump to the next result. I could also click this next button here. Depending on the browser that you're using, you'll probably have a feature like this. So I'm going to go ahead and click the checkbox next to everything that mentions article. Now each of these components is a field, and a field in this case is a set of configuration options around that field. So for example, for this comment body field, we can specify a number of options for it, like its size. And so when we create this feature module, all of that information will get pulled into it. And notice here on the right side is an ongoing list of the components that are going to be added to our feature module. So here are the fields, and we have all of the ones that we just selected. And then we actually have some other components too. We have a taxonomy, tags, and notice how it's blue. If we look down here, we see that means that it's auto-detected. And we also have a few dependencies that got added automatically. The features module, which is kind of a no-brainer, the image module, because our image field here requires the image module, and then taxonomy, because it's pulling in the taxonomy vocabulary using the field tags here. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the next set of components, which are text formats. Now here we have the 3 default text formats that are added with the standard Drupal installation. And none of these are really article specific. They're more generally associated with our site. So we're not going to add them into our feature module. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is image styles. Now there's nothing listed here because there are no image styles. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is menus. Now if we looked at a full list of menus by going to structure and then menus, we would see this list here. And if you look at the list of components, you'll see that there's menus and then there's also menu links. So it's important to understand that if we select any of these menu items, that it doesn't include the links that belong to them, but just the configuration that's associated with each one of these menus. Now none of these are exclusively used with articles, so let's go ahead and leave them unchecked for now. Next we have menu links. Now there's a lot of items here, and as your site grows there will be more and more. So I'm going to go ahead and do a browser search again for articles and see what's listed here. Now a menu link like this, which is under the Add Content navigation piece, is going to be added automatically with our content type. However, we might have specific configuration for this particular menu link, like we override the title, for example, or the description. And so if we add this to our feature module, we're adding those pieces of configuration as well. So let's go ahead and add this one. I'm going to use Command G to move to the next mention. And so let's go ahead and move on to the next set of components, which is content types. Now there's two listed here. It's pretty clear that one has to do with articles, so we'll go ahead and click article. Now what this will do is track any configuration changes to the article content type. So if we change the name of the content type, for example, or we change which fields are associated with the content type, that information will get pulled in as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to the next set of components, which is taxonomy. Now we only have one vocabulary right now, which is tags, and articles is using tags, but it's probably not the only component that will use tags. And we saw this also with text formats. We have some different text formats, and none of them are article specific, but they're probably used by articles. So while we'll talk about the ideal organization of components inside of feature modules a little later, I just wanted to mention that these components are good candidates for something like a core features module. So for example, we might create a get site, which is the name of our site, core feature, that includes all of the components that are used by some of maybe the other feature modules, but aren't specific to one in particular. And tags would be one component that we'd include in that. Now it's important to know that this component includes configuration for the vocabulary and not the terms associated with it. Okay, let's take a look at the next item on the list, which is permissions. Now this is a pretty long list, so I'm going to go ahead and use browser search again to narrow things down. Now eventually, I may want to pick through this and read every item specifically, just in case there's something that doesn't mention article, but is still directly associated with it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the search here, and we have our article create new content. We'll select that. We have article edit own content. I'll select that too and scroll down. Edit any content. We'll select that. And we'll select delete own content, as well as delete any content. Okay, and that's it. Now it's important to understand that as we look at the difference between permissions here and roles, that it's permissions that actually stores the permissions specific to a particular role. When we add a role, on the other hand, it's only going to add the name of the role or any other configuration that might be associated with it, but not the specific permissions for that role. Instead, the specific permissions are stored here with the permission itself. Okay, now let's go ahead and check out the roles real quick. And we only have one role, administrator, and we'll go ahead and leave that unchecked. Now when we're done listing our components, we can review them here on the right-hand side, and when we're ready, we just click Download Feature. And at this point, the feature module will do something pretty amazing, which is take all of these components, compile them into code, and then wrap them up in a tarball that's identical to what you'd find if you downloaded a module off of Drupal.org. And I'm going to go ahead and download it and expand it at the same time. And the folder that it expands as is the module folder. It includes our .module file, our .info file, and a few includes. So let's go ahead and copy this. And let's jump to our development site. And now I'm here inside of our sites, all modules directory. And now we have to figure out where to put this module. The typical convention is to create a new folder inside of the Sites All Modules folder called Features. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to paste in our module. Now let's go ahead and install this module. So I'm going to jump back to our site, and we can install this module one of two ways. Let me first go to the modules page. And if we scroll down to the very bottom in the features section here, we'll see any feature modules listed. And here's our articles module that we just exported. And so we can enable it by clicking this and clicking Save Configuration. The other way is by going to Structure, Features, and then enabling it here by clicking it and clicking Save Settings. Okay, so now we've successfully created our first feature module and enabled it on our site. Now when we enabled it, because all of the components that we selected already exist, none of them were created. But if any of those items didn't exist, for example, we didn't have an article content type or some of the fields were missing from it, it would add any missing components and then reconfigure it to match up with the code that we just exported.